Let's talk about audio versus video. So this section of the guide is going to go over basically the pros and cons of having an audio-focused podcast on YouTube or a video-focused podcast on YouTube. And just so you're aware of the difference, obviously everything on YouTube is in video form, but this would be an example of a video-focused podcast. You have a host on camera, you have things that pop up on the screen every now and then. There is a clear video component to it, versus an audio-focused podcast where it might just be an audio replay of a podcast. You might have a static graphic or something on screen, maybe a little waveform showing some audio, but for the most part, it's just audio playback. There's no other visual component to it for the most part. So first thing they do in this section is they talk about how people interact with video podcasts versus audio podcasts. And I'll be honest, the verbiage that they use to talk about these stats is a little bit confusing how they word it. But assuming I understand it correctly, what they're saying here is that videos with the word podcast in the title and that were 15 minutes in length and also featured a host got 2 times the views compared to videos that only featured a static visualization of some kind. So, take that for what it's worth. We're going to go in a little bit deeper and talk about why you would want audio or video or, those types of things. But there's a stat for you. So audio first production. Why would you go with an audio first production when video, typically speaking, gets more views? Well, maybe you have limited resources. Maybe, as YouTube puts it, you're just seeking awareness or incremental reach via YouTube at this time. Maybe you have time restrictions. Those are all very valid reasons. As far as resources go, if you maybe you don't have the expertise, maybe you don't have the equipment, maybe, as far as time goes, if you don't have the bandwidth, all of those things are going to prevent you from being able to go the extra mile and incorporating video into your production. Video adds a lot to the whole process. So it can be tough. But an example that they give for someone who is doing well in the podcasting space as far as audio goes on YouTube is Bloomberg. So Bloomberg has an audio first podcast, and they focus on substance over visuals. They post short clips, which can help with discovery. They utilize a lot of YouTube's tools for search and discovery. So, Bloomberg is making sure that they're using effective titles, SEO-rich descriptions. They're using chapters. They're using playlists. And in Bloomberg's case, it works very well for them. They have kind of a reputation, and the content that they put out, they just make sure that it is of the best quality. And in their case, it works for them. So if you're going to go audio only, it doesn't mean that, you're not going to see the growth that you want to see. It just might mean that you have to go a little bit extra to get there. On the other hand, video focused podcasts, why would you go with video first? Well, video fits more natively with how people consume content on YouTube. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And assuming that you have a human host, you have the benefit of seeing who's presenting the information. It can kind of give you a more connected feeling, kind of almost like the person, or it allows you to just have a stronger connection with the content itself, because you have a personality who's delivering that content to you. And again, depending on how it's presented, it can make you feel as if you have a connection with that person. But then, just in general, you have the ability to incorporate B-roll, other visual elements. And someone who's doing this really well, according to YouTube, is the 538 Politics podcast. So they are focusing on timeliness, editorial quality. They promote their video podcasts through their audio podcast. So on the audio only version of the podcast, they're saying, hey, go check out the video podcast for more, to see more, basically. They really leaned into video podcasting around the 2020 elections. And as a result, they found that their video podcast accounted for 30% of their channel views and 50% of the subscribers that they gained in 2020. So for them, video podcasting was the way to go, and it happened to work for them. Next, YouTube goes into some common video podcasting production styles. And really, it just comes down to in studio with a simple camera setup versus remote. So this would be like a simple camera in studio setup production style. You've got a couple different camera angles. You've got my main camera here. I've got kind of a wide shot in the background there. I've got a top-down shot, just different angles depending on what I want to do. If maybe you're in studio and you have a couple hosts, or maybe you have a host and a few guests, you might have a wide shot and then tight shots for each individual guest. But that would be one example. The other example would be, let's say you have all your guests on remotely. Maybe you're recording Zoom video calls, and that is the content that's what you upload as your podcast. And we're all pretty much familiar with Zoom at this point, but that's another way to do it. If you can't have people in studio, you can do things remotely. Alternatively, maybe you or your guests are not in studio with you. Maybe everything that you do is done remotely. So maybe you're recording Zoom calls for your podcast. There's another option for you as well. From here, they go into some of the different examples of video styles, ranging from static imagery playback to waveforms to what they call memojis to animations to on camera with B-roll, which would be what this is. Again, there is a description, a link in the description to this guide, and you can actually open the guide, click on these examples, and kind of see exactly what they're talking about. I recommend going and do that. Just familiarize yourself with some of the different visual formats, get some ideas from that, and see what works best for you, basically. YouTube also suggests that you feature your face in your podcast whenever possible. If you are able to do some kind of on-camera video podcast, it's best to feature a face if you can, just for a better connection with your audience. Framing is also important and has an impact. So, if you think about if you have kind of a direct front-facing camera, you're looking directly into the camera, it's more like you're part of the conversation versus, if you're sort of angled to the side, it feels like you're witnessing a part of a conversation. You're watching it. So depending on, what your podcast is like, what the style is like, if it's conversational, if it's, sort of direct interaction, think about your framing. That's going to have an impact on how your audience sort of views you and your content. And then a note that they give on video podcast quality, and I agree with this as well. It's not necessary to have all the bells and whistles in order to have a good, quote unquote, good video podcast. I know I have a lot of bells and whistles in this studio. These are all things that I kind of built up over time. It's just kind of the nature of who I am. Whether it comes to photography or video, I'm always trying to produce the best possible video quality. Plus, I feel like I would be doing my viewers a disservice by putting out poor video and audio quality podcasts when I'm out here trying to preach about how to make a better podcast. So for me, I think it makes a little bit more sense to have some of the bells and whistles. But again, if you have more conversational or just casual podcasts, and it may not be necessary for you. So just think about that a little bit and figure out what works best for you.